Steve learned to fish at an early age and never looked back. He has the dubious distinction of never owning a boat with a motor, and has fished his whole life either on foot or in a canoe. During his time at Virginia Tech, he learned to fish rivers for big smallmouth bass, and this love of rivers and streams stuck with him ever since. Although starting his career as a reservoir fisheries scientist, in 2005, his career took an abrupt turn toward river fisheries work, and since then, almost all his work has centered on rivers and streams. He has been blessed to have conducted more than 75% of research on shoal bass, which vie with smallmouth bass as his favorite fish to pursue with a rod as well. Since embarking on the native black bass trade in 2007, he has conducted research on 9 species of black bass, more than anyone else he knows in the field. In his spare time, Steve enjoys fishing, photography, and travel with his wife. Without further ado, the floor is yours.
War Eagle.
I really do appreciate this opportunity to come and speak to a group like this. Those are relatively rare in our profession. We usually just talk to each other, which is part of the problem in science, honestly. So I am somewhat long-winded, and so I'm going to just move on. So Drew asked me to talk about native black bass diversity in the United States, shoal bass research in Georgia and Alabama, and the ongoing threat with Alabama bass across the southeastern United States. And those are 3 entirely different talks, so somehow I'm going to shoehorn all that into here. So we're going to start with talking about the black bass diversity in the United States. So in the beginning, there were only 2 species of black bass, and believe it or not, smallmouth was the first one. It was described in the very early 1800s by a foreigner from France who actually got the specimen shipped to him, which you might imagine, considering the state of our mail service in the 21st century, was probably not so great in the beginning of the 19th century. And so that fish species got there damaged, and the back fin was just mostly torn off. And he didn't know that because, believe it or not, people from France had never seen a black bass in 1802. And so therefore he gave the name to it Micropterus, which actually means small fin. So an inauspicious start, if you will. Largemouth bass was described next by another person from another country. And he actually described it multiple times because they didn't realize that it was the same fish. European countries are kind of tiny. And so when he started getting fish from different parts of the country, he kept thinking they were different fish, and he came up with all kinds of great names for them, things we don't even recognize anymore. Those 4 in the middle there, Lepomis is actually what sunfish genus is. The last one there is actually a darter nowadays, and so you have to wonder where their mind was. But all of this craziness gave rise to this famous quote by Dr. James Henshaw, who wrote the Book of Black Bass in the late 18th century, who pretty much said that this was a train wreck from the get-go. And so naming of black bass has not improved much in the last 200 years. Also, I should say that Dr. Henshaw firmly believed there was only 2 species of black bass in the entire country, and would fight you otherwise. So there was more madness that happened. In 1819, the spotted bass was described. And a little bit later, the Florida largemouth bass was described. Then we jumped forward about 50 years, and the Guadalupe bass was described. Then we're back another 50 years, and red-eye bass are then described. And just a few years after that, Swanee bass was described. And one can only imagine that Dr. Henshaw, who was safely tucked away in his grave at that point, had to be thinking, at least, that this was madness and we must stop now before we go any further. But we don't stop because we didn't listen back then any more than we listen today. And so the train kept rolling on. So the next fish to be described was the shoal bass, just before we entered the 21st century. Then we have the Alabama bass, was described very recently. In 2013, as genetic techniques got better and better and people got more needy to have new fish species, the red-eye bass was broken into 5 species. And they're all now described as separate species, each with its own river basin, all for its own self. And starting in the Warrior Basin and going across to the Chattahoochee Basin in Georgia. So, that's kind of where we are right this second. If we have a roll call, if you will, of what the accepted / recognized species are right now, today, you have largemouth bass, you have smallmouth bass, you have spotted bass, you have Guadalupe bass, Swanee bass, red-eye bass, the original one, which is now just in the Coosa Basin, shoal bass, Alabama bass, Chattahoochee bass, Tallapoosa bass, Cahaba bass, Warrior bass. So 12. This is of what's currently accepted and recognized. Now, just like any other good baseball team, we have some that are on deck, waiting for their turn to be described. First, we have 2 subspecies of smallmouth bass that are almost certainly actually species. The Neosho smallmouth bass and the Ouachita smallmouth bass. They are both found in the Ozark Highlands region of Arkansas, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. Might talk a little more about them later. And then we have 2 more species of red eyes waiting in the wings for their chance in the limelight. One is the Bartram's bass in the Savannah Basin, and one is the Altamaha bass here in Georgia. And then the most recent character to arrive on the scene is the Choctaw bass, which is yet to be formally described, but efforts are on the way. And that's a critter that lives actually in a little pocket of Alabama and Florida between the Apalachicola Basin and the Mobile Basin. Now, some of you might be thinking, what about Florida bass? Okay, so this is Florida largemouth bass that some folks want to be a species. It was originally described as a subspecies formally by 2 gents named Bailey and Hubbs in 1949. It is only found in the peninsula of Florida, pretty much on a dividing line from the St. Johns River down through like where the Harris Chain Lakes are and that kind of thing, south. It does have some morphometric and meristic differences, believe it or not. Florida bass, Florida largemouth bass, whatever you want to call them, have greater numbers of lateral line scales, and they actually have more vertebrae, which is one reason why them and their intergrades are often longer than fish. If you ever fish in Minnesota and you fish for pure northern largemouth bass, I'm guessing you've almost never seen a 23-inch fish up there. And I guarantee you, I'll lay money, you've never seen a 24-inch fish up there. I can tell you right now, these guys reach those lengths commonly and often much longer, even when they're intergrades. So there is a difference between these guys. There's bigger genetic differences. One researcher who's obviously in the camp of we want these to be their own species, pointed out that there's a 3 times greater difference in the genetic structure between this fish and northern largemouth bass than there is between spotted bass and smallmouth bass. Maybe so. There's a subset of biologists that think this should be elevated. There's others that disagree. And the biggest interest, or the biggest problem, and I've heard a noted taxonomist bring this up in a meeting, and I love this because it has nothing to do with numbers, it has nothing to do with genetics, it has to do with common sense, which is sorely lacking in our society and in our science as well at times. So there's a weird intergrade zone between these fish. Most of Georgia is in it. It goes up into North Carolina, almost to the Virginia state line. And there's just a bunch of natural fish that are hybrids, if you will, between northern largemouth bass and Florida largemouth bass. And he pointed out, if they're separate species, which if you think about separate species, that means they've been separated forever and ever and ever and ever. Why would there be this intergrade zone? That's a great question that I've yet to hear answered. They just kind of ignore it and sweep it under the rug because we don't want to know that. Look at the genetics! Yes, that's great, but what about that intergrade zone? Why the hell would that be there if they're separate species? There's no intergrade zone between smallmouth bass and spotted bass. Is there some big swath of Tennessee and what else would it be? Kentucky and Missouri, where there's a whole bunch of hybrid smallmouth and spotted bass running around because the two ranges are overlapping there? No, there's not. So, you know, right now it's boiled down to these states, particularly Florida, are wanting this to be a species, so they call it Micropterus floridanus. Anybody who's stocking this fish outside its native range is pretending it's not a species because then they can. And so we're kind of left with that right now. Moving on, maybe a little more interesting, where the hell are all these things found? So we'll start with the big three. Some of this could be an eye-opener to you in the crowd. So this is largemouth bass. Anything in yellow is their native range. Anything not in yellow is not their native range. There's a lot of folks that don't realize that all the largemouth bass in the northeastern United States are not native. They're actually originally found in the Mississippi River Basin, the basins to the west of the Mississippi that flow into the Gulf of Mexico, and the southern Atlantic slope. Everything in the Northeast was stocked. Now, why do we not hear headlines about this? Because it was stocked around the time that Benjamin Franklin was stomping around Philadelphia. So we just kind of think that they're native, but they're not. Smallmouth bass, very similar situation. They are also native to the Mississippi River Basin, and I should note that both of these fish species are also native to the Great Lakes, which means, and I don't have a pointer, but there's a little sliver of Great Lakes drainage that runs along Maine and dumps into that big body of water up there called the St. Lawrence Seaway. You might have heard of it. They're actually native to that. They're just not native south of there. And that's the same as smallmouth bass. So you see where their native range is. They range from Minnesota. If you've ever been to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, and I have many times, it's awesome. Every single fish in there is not native. Sorry, it's not where they're from. They start at Lake Itasca, the headwaters of Mississippi River, and they go down, and they pretty much, their southern end of their natural ranges in the Tennessee River Basin. Spotted bass are like the exact opposite, almost. So they're also in the Mississippi River Basin, but they're in the southern part of the Mississippi Basin. And obviously these fish have been widely stocked outside their native ranges. Let's drill in a little bit on smallmouth bass. So there are these other two weird species of smallmouth bass, and this is an excellent example of what we have here. So the Neosho smallmouth bass is mostly in Oklahoma and a bit of Missouri, a little bit in Arkansas, and the Ouachita is the next basin down. The Neosho is a formal subspecies of smallmouth bass. Its official name, Micropterus dolomite velox. Ouachita is just considered to be a distinct genetic lineage because no one has actually gone ahead and done it. However, genetics strongly suggest it is divergent from both of the others. And I happen to have a colleague at Auburn University now who did most of her work at Oklahoma State University on Neosho smallmouth bass. We actually know a fair amount about this fish. If you want to know, again, I like practicalities. How is species X different from species Y without us talking about genetics? Neosho smallmouth bass is a river fish. They do not persist in reservoirs. One of the things that Oklahoma noticed when they built reservoirs is that the smallmouth bass disappeared. And they're like, what the hell? They're in the river up here. Why are they not in the reservoir anymore? And then they started stocking Tennessee strain smallmouth bass in the reservoirs, which of course is the northern smallmouth bass. She actually has done some work on these fish. We actually had telemetry in them, and Alcohola is a bit more arid than here. So there's times where like it doesn't rain for 8 months and the reservoirs go whoop, and then they blow up like that. She actually had, this is so cool, she had radios in these fish one of those times where Grand Lake went, and those smallmouth, which were hovering above the reservoir level in the streams, went down into the reservoir, which was now a river, and then when it went back up, they're like, oh, fuck this, and they went right back up into the river. So, they are different, can we agree? Smallmouth bass live in natural lakes, for crying out loud, right? You know, so that's clearly a different species. I don't even need to see the genetics. There's something different about them. Not much is known, truthfully, about the Ouachita fish. Getting a little closer to home here, Guadalupe bass. They are found in the Edwards Plateau area of Texas. We know it more commonly as the Hill Country. Beautiful area. If you've never been, go. It's unbelievable. I can't believe you're in Texas. Spotted bass, we've already seen that one. That's up there for a reason. Alabama bass is in the Mobile Basin only. Shoal bass, we know, is in the ACF. Swanee bass is right there in some Gulf Coast streams, to the east of the ACF. And why I wanted to left the spotted bass in there is one of the great ways you get speciation is geographic isolation. And by that I mean through time. And the reason why the Choctaw bass was always this thing, so they look a lot like spotted bass, but those two gents, Hubbs and Bailey, back in 1949, circled that area and said something might be up here. And why did they say that? Because it is completely isolated from the rest of the spotted bass range by the Mobile Basin. And so those fish down there have been isolated from the rest of them for a long, long time. And, you know, this is going to make my talk even a little longer, but the story of how it was found is so cool. It has a shoal bass component. Biologists in Florida, in the Chipola River, had a sample of shoal bass genetics. They were looking for hybridization for spotted bass, like we seem to be doing all the time now. And they had, I remember this, it was in a meeting, we had no idea what was going on, and Mike Tringali, who's the top geneticist down there, is like, yeah, we have this really weird fish we got there. It's coding out as a hybrid between a shoal bass and a Guadalupe bass. And we're all like, what? And there were all these wild theories in the room about how the hell did a Guadalupe bass make it 1,000 miles or more over to the Chipola River. I mean, you know, we're talking about black helicopters and government trains in the 1800s that were moving across the country and dumping stuff at all the bridge crossings, which actually did happen. And not with Guadalupe bass, though. But I mean, there was all kinds of, you know, some crazy MFer who just said, I gotta have Guadalupe bass over here in the Chipola, and took the best road trip ever, kind of like the Blues Brothers, going over to the Hill Country and bringing some back. And just by happenstance, after a couple years of wild craziness, they were like, I wonder what the other rivers look like. And they went over to the Choctawhatchee, which is the very next drainage over, and lo and behold, the spotted bass that are in the Choctawhatchee are more related to the Guadalupe bass than anything else. And that's what it was that they hybridized with. So it's always cool when you find a new species and you're not actually looking for it. That's called science instead of an agenda. Red-eye bass, I already mentioned this. This is what it's going to look like. A couple of those on the eastern two are not described yet, but each one has its own drainage basin. Some of those range maps are a little ambitious. I don't think Tallapoosa bass goes that far down. I know Chattahoochee bass don't go that far down, and I'm not sure about the Barks. So that's where you find these guys. So there's one thing that became very clear to me as I was working on these new bass species. We think we know everything there is to know about black bass because we study them. They're the most popular sport fish in America. Surely we know everything about them. So this is what we quote unquote know about black bass. So they're generalists. They do equally well in slow-moving water or rocky streams or rivers or pools or reservoirs or ponds or lakes or whatever. You throw it at a black bass, it's like, give me more. So they build nests, firm substrate. They love to defend it and all that kind of stuff, and you can fish bedding bass, and it's so awesome because you can just put there, it's like a video game, you just watch them eat your lure. You know, you can size select like that. Some bitch is too small, I don't want him, I want that one. You know. So they eat everything, you name it, they'll wrap their lips around it. If they can fit it down their gullet, they'll go after it. They're very adaptable. You can try to kill them, but they're kind of like rats. You know, dam up the river, no problem. You know, build farms up against cropland right against the river, no problem. Bring it on, bring it on. And they're a conservation risk, ironically, for other species, especially when you introduce them. The scientific literature is rife with all of this. Like, they're the devil out in the Pacific Northwest. They're eating all the salmon. They've been stocked all over the world, and they are legitimately causing problems in South Africa, where they're eating all the native fish. In Puerto Rico, where about half of their native species are gone because they throw, I mean, you know, again, there's a big difference between throwing a predator in a place where there's other predators versus throwing them in a place where there are no predators, and like an awful lot of Europe doesn't have predaceous fish except like pike. So these fish are just like, la-di-da-di-da, how you doing? Gulp. You know, I mean, they have no predator avoidance behavior, so it happens. So this is what we know about black bass. But how well does that stack up with reality if we have 19 species? So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to tie all this together, you see, is I'm going to talk about the one I know the most about, and we're going to see how well that stacks up with what we know about shoal bass. I've been studying them since 2005. Most of you know what shoal bass are in this room, but for those of you who might not, meet the shoal bass. It's endemic to the Apalachicola watershed. It's an obligate-loaded species. That's a $10 word. It means it's only found in rivers and streams. If you impound them, they go away. They prefer a rocky habitat with strong flow. Around here, that means they're common around the fall line, and that might be another conception we're not 100% sure about. So just because they have nothing better to do, geologists have divided up the country into different physiographic provinces, if you will. So the Piedmont is where we're standing right now. It's an area of rolling hills, very clay substrate. Think about all the red clay you see when someone tills their yard or builds a house or whatever it is. And then you have the coastal plain, which is down south of us. And it's where it gets real flat, and it looks great for farming or for growing pine trees and stuff like that. The area between those two is actually the shore of an ancient ocean. The ocean was once higher, a lot higher. And for centuries, millennia, whatever it is, I'm not a geologist, I study fish, but for a long time, the erosion basically was beating against that shoreline like it does, and when it receded, you had a big cliff there, essentially, if you will. It's not quite a cliff, but it's an area where everything slopes down, and you can drive over it. There's plenty of roads that go north-south, and you just notice all of a sudden. And a great example of this, by the way, is the Chattahoochee. The Chattahoochee, and you can all play this game too if you haven't done it before, because Google Earth has elevations on it. Like if you stick your cursor over there, it tells you what it is. Go home tonight, this is your homework, pull up the Chattahoochee around West Point, stick your cursor below West Point Dam, write that number down, go down to Columbus and put it down below the old Eagle Phoenix Dam and write that number down and subtract one from the other. That is 41 miles of river, and what you're going to find is it was somewhere between 300 and 350 feet difference. Just imagine what that place used to look like. They called it the Falls of the Chattahoochee. You know, now it's all under reservoirs, of course. But still, that's the fall line. I can't explain it any better than that. But that's what a lot of our rivers go over. Needless to say, if you like rocks and you like flow, that's your place. So I'll just crouch down for a second. So here we go. Chattahoochee, again, you all know where this is. The Flint, the Chipola, that's where all our shoal bass are that are native. And then we have the Okmulgee over there where they've been introduced since the 70s. Shoal bass, unlike a lot of these native black bass, have the kindness to get extremely large. And so therefore, they attract an awful lot of angling attention, including, I'm sure, every person in this room. So they're a very important sport fishery. Now, in 2007, we started a 4-year study on the Flint River to try to get some basic data on shoal bass and also to look at the possible effects of introduced spotted bass at that point, which had just been found in the Flint a couple of years before that. So we did a radio tracking study as part of that. And again, it was an eye of seeing how did these fish all act differently in the same place. So the numbers aren't necessarily important. The graphs on this side is flow. The graphs on this side is depth. They are in metric, so again, that really doesn't mean anything. But look at the difference here, okay, among the species. So largemouth bass, big surprise, don't like really fast water. Shoal bass, love it. Spotted bass, they're kind of wishy-washy. They don't like it as much as shoal bass, but they don't hate it as much as largemouth bass. And you see depth use is exactly the same situation here. Largemouth bass found deeper, shoal bass found a little shallower, and once again, spotted bass are kind of doing the straddling the line here. This is a simple thing, although it took an awful lot of work to get this data. You know, you track fish for 12 months, every 2 weeks. To get this kind of data, but it's a very quick depiction of how two native species, the two top ones, okay, two native species divide the habitat up really quite nicely here. They're like almost mirror images of each other. And then the invader looks like he could be trouble for either one of them. This is another thing here. So we can get really fancy. We have side scan sonar of the entire study area, about 16 miles of the river. And we can actually calculate distance to the nearest bedrock, distance to the nearest boulder, distance to the large woody debris, blow down tree, log, distance to the bank. And I love this because this matches what anyone who's fishing for shoal bass would be not surprised at. So not as much different to bedrock, but shoal bass are way closer to boulders than either of the other two. They're way farther away from wood because they don't like wood. They're not a fan of wood in streams, you know. They can be found on wood, but if you give them a choice between this log or this rock, they want the rock. The other thing that I've noticed, and I bet you have too, is that they like the middle of the stream. You know, I started river fishing for smallmouth bass, and I've done an awful lot of flipping under undercuts, and all kinds of stuff for them. I used to try that for this, and I'd catch red breast sunfish. And I'm like, what the hell? You know, or I'd catch even worse, largemouth bass. I'm like, what? What the hell is this? You know, and it took me a while. It didn't take me too long. It took me one trip with Drew to figure out what the hell I was doing wrong. Because they're out there setting up on a shoal with their back to the damn bank, throwing this way. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And yeah, so our telemetry data shows that too. Again, they use the habitat much differently. So another really cool thing. So we did another tagging study, not a telemetry. This is a more traditional tagging study where you put these kinds of tags in the fish, throw them back, hope somebody catches them and calls it in and says, hey, I caught your fish. And then it's like, did you keep it or let it go? And they'll tell you, and you write all that stuff down. And on what we didn't realize is that we were going to get some unbelievable movement data out of this. So what we did is that we have a 200 kilometer, that would be about a 160 mile river sampling site. That basically translates from the farthest north access point on the upper Flint River to the farthest down one. If you know the Flint, Joe Kerr's to Reeves Landing. So we shocked it by boat, and if we could get a boat in there, we fished. It's a tough job. Someone has to do it. So this is just one little snippet But I'll never forget these phone calls because the phone number was my office. So I got to talk to every single person that caught one of these. And it always went like this. Hey, I caught your fish. Okay, great. What's the tag number? Okay, thank you, sir. Did you let it go? No? Okay, fine. Where'd you catch the fish? Okay, thank you. And then I'd look at it later and I go, holy shit. So this is a great example. We tagged 25 fish in two instances, right above the Highway 96 bridge. That's Fort Valley, if you're familiar with the area. 12 of the fish got recaptured. Only one was found anywhere near where we tagged it. The next closest one swam so far up this tiny tributary stream below this, was caught below a mill dam, that I had to convince the gentleman on the other line, on the other side of the phone, that yes, this must flow into the Flint River, sir, because I tagged the fish in the Flint River and they don't walk. And then after that, it just got crazy. So everybody else, the other 11 fish, were found 75 or more kilometers upstream of where we tagged the fish. This is crazy shit for a bass, right? I mean, this is not what you expect to see for a bass. And what's even better is that, okay, so flat shoals. I talked to some gentleman about flat shoals at this meeting. That is the farthest north big shoal. See all these other things, Paisley Shoals, the Flint River Outdoor Center, Yellow Jacket Shoals, Big Weiser WMA. Those are all massive shoals. For that fish to hit, for 3 of those fish, to swim 120 kilometers up the flat shoals, it wasn't like they were just leisurely swimming up this big wide river without an obstruction. They were going over these freaking shoals, man, that honest to God, some of them would kill you. Like Yellow Jacket Shoals, the whole river drops 40 feet in a mile. These things went right over that thing and didn't even slow down. They're like, yeah, that was a good stretcher, I'm going to swim, I don't know, another 50 miles. So this is some crazy stuff. Look at it as a whole view. Movements in the spring and it's upstream. If we tagged the fish in the summer or the fall and they were recaptured before Christmas, they didn't move. They did what all black bass do. This is what they're all supposed to do. If we tagged them in the fall or the late summer and they were caught in the spring, all of a sudden, everything we knew about black bass, thrown out the window. And this is what we now have, where maybe about 40% of the fish were found somewhere near where we tagged them, and the others were found at ridiculous distances. That other one cut off about here. Look at this guy and look at that one. 200 kilometers. You might remember I said the study site was 200 kilometers long. We tagged that fish at the lowest possible spot and it was caught at the highest possible spot. That fish traversed the entire study area. What we also saw was really interesting is there's 2 subpopulations in this river. You have the fish that were tagged, so this is just fish that we tagged in the Piedmont or tagged in the coastal plain. And they were all pretty much caught in the Piedmont. So if we tagged in the Piedmont, they're pretty much found pretty close to where we tagged them. Yeah, a little bit of wiggle room on either side, within 20 kilometers, almost all of them. The coastal plain, however, only about 15–20% of those fish were recaptured back on the coastal plain. The others were all upstream. And so this is the situation that you actually have here. If you're thinking about the Piedmont and those shoals, okay? You have these fish that live there, the residents, and then you have this another whole bunch of fish that live most of their life far away down in woody land and move up the river in the spring. And so if you want to know why the fishing's so freaking incredible in the spring in the Flint River, it's because everybody's there. It's a giant party. And then they go back home. Now where in the world are they going? They're going to these, what I call mega shoal complexes. These really big, giant ones. They have the name, the skull and crossbones, don't pass here. There are these big mosaics of shallow and deep and flow and eddies, and this is where they spawn. They pile in there and spawn all throughout that matrix there. And it happens in tributary streams too. We had a project on the Chattahoochee tributary stream. We tagged the fish all over the place. 1-2 week period in April, 96% of our tagged fish were in the shoal at the same time. This gives you an idea now of why the fishing's so damn good in the spring. Why does Yellow Jacket Shoals just seemingly never run out of fish? Because it doesn't. Because they just keep showing up. Okay, so also growth is really interesting. Shoal bass in the Flint River go faster than any other black bass species. That was another eye-opener because until then, the absolute all-time welterweight champion of the world of growth in black bass was largemouth bass. Nothing outgrows them, but shoal bass do, no problem. Another really interesting thing, now this is getting a little techie, so, but one of the ways we can look at recruitment success, reproduction success, if you want to do that, is looking at the occurrence of year classes through time. And so basically on this axis right here, you have year class strength. So if you're up here, you're having good year classes. If you're down here, you're having crappy year classes. And so, and then this is your mean daily flow during the spawning season. So what has been done over and over and over again, even for smallmouth bass, floods during the spawn are bad because you're a nest spawner. You have a nest. You have these little critters that are swimming around and you're defending them. And you can defend them from sunfish, you can defend them from maybe from bowfin, you can defend them from gar, you can defend them from other minnows. What you can't defend them for is a 500-year flood. That's just going to wash them downstream and you just have a shitty year class. And we see that for largemouth bass. Exactly what we would expect. But look at shoal bass. They're like, you know what? We don't care. Drought, we're good. Flood, yeah, we're good too. Middle of the road, fine. This is a fish that is so purely adapted to a river situation that it doesn't care. That's like, we can pull it off no matter what you throw at us. Bring it on. This was all eye-opening stuff, really. It was for a black bass. So what does all this mean? They're highly mobile. They move seasonally. They congregate in these shoals. That's never been found before for a black bass to have spawning aggregations is what it's actually called. A lot of marine fish do this. Suckers do this. Obviously salmon do this. Some trout do this. But black bass? No, it's never been found. Shoal bass habitat, or shoal habitat's obviously an important nursery area because a lot of little fish stay there their first summer. We have the two subpopulations we talked about. Recruitment of shoal bass is very stable. We can't figure out what the hell actually makes a bad thing for them, although they don't like hydropeaking, but that's not in the Flint River. It's a natural flow. So, if you think about this, and you think about that list that I just mentioned, how well does what we know about black bass stack up to what we now know about shoal bass? What we really found out was we were thinking what we knew all about largemouth bass, therefore we know all about black bass. And what we have realized is we don't know shit from Shinola. So, there are threats to this fish. Habitat degradation, habitat loss, especially if you build housing development on top of a spawning shoal, you're going to have a disproportionate effect on the population. Think about that one creek where 96% of the fish spawn in one place. If that goes, the entire fishery is gone. Doesn't matter what they do 10 miles upstream. What matters is what did they do there. Reservoirs are really bad. Reduced stream flow, we're seeing a lot of that, and that's more of a smaller stream thing. But if they're in these smaller streams and your flows are lower now because you have a lot more houses there and they're sucking water out of the aquifers, then you have a chance of having real problems there. And integration with non-native congeners is going to be a theme. That just means if you put other black bass species in there, bad things happen. And ignorance. And what the heck do I mean by ignorance? So, a long time ago, but not as long as the first long time ago, we worked on 4 streams in Alabama This was the first time I ever worked on shoal bass, first time I'd ever really even seen a shoal bass. There are 4 streams in Alabama that have historically had shoal bass in them, with long Indian names that I do not propose to pronounce. So in the late 1960s, a gentleman at Auburn University was able to do a thesis where he looked at just the basic food habits and growth of spotted bass and shoal bass. It wasn't a population study. It wasn't a catch per unit effort study. We have no idea how much time it took him to do this. But the fact is, he was capable in the 1960s from this creek to collect equal numbers, roughly, of both species. Now, here's where the ignorance part comes in. Because we're still, let's just say we're in the 60s now, which I was just born, but we're under the idea that black bass are impervious to anything that we do. So we ignore them. I mean, freaking Alabama has 369 species of freshwater fish. Believe me, black bass are down at the end of that, right? So we took a nap for 40 freaking years, and the next time we went back in there, we found that basically shoal bass are gone. Well, shit. And then we looked at the other 3 creeks, or other 2 creeks, and we saw the same repeated pattern. And what's there now? All these spotted bass. Only 1 creek still had shoal bass in them. This was a rather disturbing thing to find out. So shoal bass went from prolific to protected, as they said in that famous article in the Alabama Wildlife magazine, and they put restrictions on them, no more harvest, like, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sad to say that one of the things that we found out with small populations is that one population we did have, anyone remember what might have happened back in the mid-2000s? It actually went all into 2007 too. 2007 was a big number in Atlanta history. They almost ran out of water because we had this historic crushing drought. You might suspect that if a 20,000 acre reservoir almost runs out of water, that perhaps a small stream might be in more dire straits. And that's what happened here. The population tanked because there was basically no water for the fish anymore. And it never recovered, and it is now extinct. So, there are no shoal bass in Alabama anymore. So, the question is, how can a sport fish go extinct, or almost go extinct, from a major river system without anyone noticing? How's that possible? Well, they're rarely collected during typical fish community sampling. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. And species borrowing as a surrogate for knowledge. This is a problem we have in this field a lot, and one of it's because we're greatly outnumbered. There are roughly 28,000 species of fish in the world, which is more than all the other vertebrates put together. And so it's hard to know everything about every species. But what that really means is that largemouth bass do not equal shoal bass. And we know a lot about largemouth bass, but that means we know nothing about shoal bass. Now, I said they're hard to collect. Let me give you some numbers when I say hard to collect. Georgia DNR has a stream team that is top notch. These people know what they're doing. They know how to sample streams, they know how to collect fish. They're there to basically monitor water quality through biotic collections. That's their job. They know what they're doing. From a 15-year period, they collected shoal bass 16 times in 7 different creeks in the ACF basin. That sounds pretty good. That was out of 259 possible samples in 169 creeks. Even more alarming, they failed to collect shoal bass in 11 streams where you could go with a fishing rod and catch them. So, what does one say when that kind of thing happens? It definitely was an eye-opener for me. Why is this happening? It's because shoal bass have the bad manners to live in places that are really difficult to sample. This is the place that used to have shoal bass in Alabama. And I can tell you that that is not a fun place to go walking around with a backpack shocker and a bucket. Now you can gang up on them, which has been tried. But what happens when you're in a spawning shoal that looks like this? There ain't enough backpack shockers and biologists in Georgia and Alabama combined to cover that damn thing. So it leads to what I call samplist overconfidence syndrome, where you think everything's great because you're using accepted protocols and all that, and what you actually have is garbage. And that is how 40 years can go by with a fish quietly going extinct 20 miles from our campus and no one freaking noticing. And what it has led to, if we look at the bird's eye view of Chattahoochee, is not a pretty scene. The Chattahoochee has been under duress for a long time. We as humans have done our worst in the Chattahoochee Basin, and we've been very successful at it. There's still a natural population, I'm happy to report, not even introgressed for the most part, above Lake Lanier. And that's the extent of the happy news. Obviously, Lake Lanier and Morgan Falls and West Point and all of these fuckers down here have eliminated shoal bass just because they're reservoirs. So they don't like that. The trout tailwater below Buford Dam, turns out shoal bass really, like other black bass, are not big fond of 50-degree water temperature that never warms up. So they're not there. They stopped them below Morgan Falls Dam and created a population there, which was going fine until some person stocked smallmouth bass in there, and now they're all fucked up. So they're not even that. So anyway, 70 miles of stream or river below Atlanta, which has great habitat and not one shoal bass in it. I've spent a lot of time shocking there. I've seen some great hybrids. More about that in a second. Then you have the fall line area, which is basically from West Point down to the top of where that red circle is. There are still 6 dams there, soon to be 4. There are relic populations below each one of them, handful of species, and a couple in the tributaries. Everything south of the fall line is gone because it's one continuous reservoir from the headwaters near Columbus to Lake Seminole. Very likely this used to operate like the Flint River, but that's over. That's gone. And things can happen, shit can happen fast around here. So there was one population in a little stream below Lanier, but above Lake Morgan Falls. It had shoal bass in it. In 2005, some studies were done there. They collected a very nice number of pure shoal bass. But a couple smallmouth bass, probably from our friend downstream, and a hybrid. 10 years later, 10 years later, the shoal bass are on their way out and everything's hybridized. That 10 years is going to come up again before I'm done today. But think about that. A decade goes by like that, and when you're as old as I am, it's even faster than that. You can blink your eyes and things are no longer good. The lower part of the Chattahoochee, above West Point though, is full of bass that look like this. Well, what the hell any of these things are, I don't have a clue. Okay? So I remember distinctly the first time we went out and shocked that 80-mile stretch of river, 4 access points. I'm telling you, man, I've worked on bass a long time, and 50% of the fish that came in there, I'm like, bass? Maybe a spotted bass, it's ridiculous. Does anyone have any idea what the hell that is? Because I sure don't. How about that? I apologize in advance for all the nightmares you're going to have after this picture. My buddy Troy down in Warner Robins still chastises me to this day for giving him nightmares, and I first showed this picture to him 15 years ago. That, by the way, was genetically typed. If you want to know what an ugly-ass bass is, it's when your largemouth crosses with a spotted bass. That's exactly what that is. How about this beauty? Anyone have any idea what this is? The reason you don't is because it's all of them. That's the genetic component of that fish. It's got 5 species of bass. It is literally the bass slam in one fish. You win if you get this. This is the lottery. Unfortunately, an awful lot of these fish are looking like this, and this is what geneticists call a hybrid swarm. And what this is the bass populations are circling the proverbial drain. This happens when there's so much hybridization, and the hybrids are crossing with hybrids, and the hybrids are crossing back with hybrids, and every once in a while a pure fish shows up and gets immediately swarmed by hybrids, and you have nothing in there pure. And that is where the Chattahoochee is, south of Atlanta. There's very few pure fish left in there. We're seeing the same things over in the Savannah Basin, because I'm not going to really talk about that at all today formally, but I'll just say Savannah River reservoirs and that kind of place, they're the same thing. Like there's almost no pure fish over there anymore. This could be the future of our fisheries here. This is what I don't know how many times I've caught fish like this in the Chattahoochee Basin. I call this the real Chattahoochee bass, not because I don't think the red eye is one, but nowhere else can you catch fish like this. What the hell is that? There is no markings on that fish at all. I call it Micropterus genericus. And I'm sure it'll be a species before long. We'll let the genetics have it. So this is kind of, you know, where we are today in the 21st century when it comes to shoal bass. I mean, it's funny, but it's also really, really sad. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about more depressing shit. So the Altamaha bass is just south of us. This is its range, its supposed range. We don't really know the full range of it. So that is the upper the upper Altamaha Basin system. It's basically the Ocmulgee and the Oconee River is what that is. So Ocmulgee was stocked with shoal bass back in the 70s. I briefly mentioned that right there. They've been in there since the early 70s. They had a rapid expansion, as bass do when you put them somewhere where they're not supposed to be. They created a great fishery. I've actually been with Drew and took a picture of his first 7-pound shoal bass from there. But they wiped out the native red-eye bass. There's always a consequence when you stock a new fish somewhere where it's not supposed to be. So there are no basically Altamaha bass in the main stem of the Ocmulgee anymore. We have no idea what's in the tribs. No one's been looking. So just to add insult to injury, Alabama bass was introduced into the system in the late 1990s. You see all kinds of great pictures of people with big quote-unquote spotted bass that are actually Alabama bass that they catch from the Ocmulgee, which is great, except they just added to the problems. So, for quite a while, so what I'm talking about here is 20, 30, 40 years old, right? I mean, the shoal bass has been in there for 50 years now, and the Alabama bass has been in there for almost 30. So we're talking about old things, you know, okay, so the Ocmulgee's toast for Altamaha bass. So their mainstay is the Oconee. So thank God for the Oconee. Yeah. This little area right below Lake Sinclair was a great spot to catch Altamaha bass. It was a mainstay for them. The Oconee, by the way, has 2 major reservoirs, Sinclair and Oconee, Lake Oconee. They don't like reservoirs anymore than shoal bass do, so that exterminated them from a lot of their range in the Oconee. But they had that spot until right before COVID, I started getting people emailing me these fun little pictures and telling me, oh yeah, we caught these below Lake Sinclair. I'm like, fuck. We got one of them genotyped. It's basically a pure shoal bass. Like, oh my God, what the F? So DNR went in there, they collected a bunch of fish, they field ID'd them as largemouth, Altamaha bass, Alabama bass, and hybrids, ran the genetics, as usual. Most of the fish we thought were pure are actually hybrids. I'm like, oh shit. And so it's just gotten worse since then. I think they're going to collect genetics again next year. But the bottom line is, this is another one of those things where it's death by 1,000 cuts. This usually doesn't happen with like one giant oil spill and they're all gone. Instead, it's like, oh, we lost them here, but we still have them here. Oh, shit, now they're gone from there. Well, they're over here. Oh, shit. You know, and so Alabama bass, which weren't even in the Oconee as little as, I don't know, 10 years ago, right now they're all over from Lake Sinclair down, and now they're also above Lake Oconee all the way to Athens. And so it's like, well, they're cross them off here, cross them off there. Again, we don't know what's in the tribs. I will say that Georgia DNR is looking for them right now. But this is the state of native black bass management research in the 21st century, I'm sad to say. Let's look at Chattahoochee bass. Surely this isn't as depressing. Oh, well. So they're found in the upper part of the Chattahoochee. Beautiful fish. They don't get very big, but the red fins are just amazing to see. So they're obviously threatened by the same things that all of them are, non-native black bass species. Georgia DNR spent 3 years doing something pretty serious, looking for these fish. This is in the extreme headwaters up near Helen and all that, the least altered part of the basin. So surely all is well there. And what they found is that out of 46 sites, they only even found the damn fish at 18 sites. That's not good. Even worse, of all those sites, the only places that they found no hybrids was 2 of them. So there may only be 2 pure populations of this fish above Lake Lanier. They went downstream and found a little less of a rosy picture down there. They sampled 47 sites. They only found them in 15. And of those 15, most of them were hybridized and with non-natives. They only found 2 places right near the Alabama border, ironically, that they haven't been screwed up yet. Although I can say one of them is up above a waterfall, so unless some idiot throws them above there, we should be all right. So I'm going to wrap up with one more happy story, and we can all go home depressed. We had been thinking that Alabama bass was a problem confined to small streams and what we call narrow range endemics. And what that means is that fish are only found in a basin or 2 or stuff like that. Fish that are found over half the country, they should be fine. They're very adaptable, theoretically. Well, so Alabama bass, we know about them. They're only in the Mobile Basin. The Mobile Basin is mostly Alabama, a little bit of Georgia, a little slice of Mississippi, and a tiny, tiny piece of Tennessee. They were formerly considered a subspecies of spotted bass. It's another one of those head scratchers, just like when they used to consider shoal bass a red-eye bass, where you go, there's no effing way. And that's true here too. Spotted bass, a really, really big one, is that big, and of course we all know what you can catch with Alabama bass. So we knew that wasn't true. They're highly adaptable. They occupy a wide range of habitats. I've caught them in creeks that are no wider than this room. And of course, you can also catch them in Lewis Smith Lake that's 300 feet deep. They're fast growing. And they're particularly successful in deep, rocky, clear reservoirs, which with oligotrophication, as reservoirs lose nutrients through time, as that trophic upsurge dissipates, they become perfect homes for them. How perfect? Well, this was just unfreaking believable. This is one of those ones where if you had asked me to bet money on this, I would have lost every bit. So Lake Norman, North Carolina, is a 35,000 acre reservoir just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Its only bass species was largemouth bass until somebody put Alabama bass in there in 2001. And you can see what happened then. Alabama bass took way the hell off, and largemouth bass completely tanked. And just for all those people who say, oh, but they added to the fishery, this is total black bass catch rates through time. And what you can see is they didn't add shit. That's basically the same bass numbers you were catching before you're catching now, except instead of 4 and 5 pound largemouth bass as a possibility, you're catching 2 and 3 pound Alabama bass.
I'm not sure that's a great trade. So you see that drastic decline. Alabama bass, in 10 short years, I told you 10 was coming back up, became the dominant black bass species, and it still is today. No change in that overall abundance. Now, if that was an isolated case, wouldn't that be nice? But it's not isolated, because once they get thrown somewhere, they have this annoying tendency to keep getting moved. Blues Lake, up in northern North Carolina. Can't quite read that. Largemouth bass had a 46% decline. The overall did not change. Overall catch rates did not change at all. How about Blue Ridge Lake, right here in Alabama? Alabama bass had the most ridiculous increase I've ever seen in my life. Largemouth bass, though, also increased, which sounds great, except the native smallmouth bass were gone, eliminated completely, completely gone. And so overall, it was a high increase. However, in this case, the biologist there thinks that the introduction of blueback herring may have actually bumped everything up a little artificially. And so this is an unusual situation. By the way, Lake Norman had blueback herring in it too. It didn't help them any. How about Moss Lake? Alabama bass, huge increase. Largemouth bass decline. Overall, so far, an increase, but they've only been in the lake for about 10 years. So that story is yet to be written. And incidentally, we've always said that people, are throwing these fish in these lakes, but you never hear about it. Moss Lake, they had the decency to confess. The biologist there was doing a habitat enhancement study with a local bass club in 2008. And they happened to mention, oh, yeah, 2 years ago we had this big tournament at Lake Norman, and we decided after we were done we were going to fill our live wells up with Alabama bass and drive them up here and dump them in. And he's like, what? And then they went out and started sampling. Moss Lake is a little lake. They don't usually sample it that much. Then they went out and sampled it, and they were already the dominant bass. I'm like, fuck. Let's see. Which one popped up? Oh, Lake Norman. We already know about that one. Oh, Tennessee, Parksville Reservoir. They were put in there at the same time as Lake Norman. Alabama bass, super increase. Largemouth bass, super decline. Eliminated smallmouth bass. Overall, no change. Do you see a pattern here? Okay. Now, let me tell you, when you start looking at this as a holistic look, it starts getting some people pretty agitated. Because, oh wait, there's more. Not only do they outcompete them and drive them to extinction, they hybridize. If you're not a largemouth bass, they'll just hybridize you out of existence. So here's some fun genetics. Montana Reservoir, western North Carolina, fantastic smallmouth bass fishery, which is basically being eliminated as we watch. This is like real-time extinction going on right in front of us. Claytor Lake, if that sounds familiar, and if it sends some chills down your spine, it should, because the blue ribbon, world-class smallmouth bass fishery in the New River is below that dam, and they're in there and already hybridizing with them. This is a fun one. South Carolina DNR folks went out and got this big broodstock collection of smallmouth bass from Lake Monticello. They were ready to spawn them in the hatchery, and they're like, yeah, we should genetically screen them first. Good idea, because only 60% of them were actually smallmouth bass, and the rest of them were all freaking hybridized with shit. So they have a pretty scorched earth policy here. They have two paths of destruction. They either directly compete with largemouth bass and eliminate them that way, or they hybridize with smallmouth bass and spotted bass and get rid of them that way. So the consequences. Largemouth bass are impacted through direct competition. Size effect. These reservoirs are anywhere from 1,000 acres to 35,000. It doesn't seem like they're too big for that not to happen. Alabama bass replace these other bass very quickly, and they're not often additive. And then they impact everything else through hybridization more than they do competition. And the other thing is rapid. Every single case has happened within 10 years. 10 years, man. You can barely even detect the invasion before it's already too late. And how fast did they spread across the landscape? This is kind of sobering. So in the 1970s, they were in one place outside their native range. They were in Lake Lanier and in that general area in the upper Chattahoochee. You know, a few years later, they moved downstream. They got put in the Savannah Basin. They showed up in the Okmulgee. And then these two events here seem to be the trigger for some odd reason. In 2001, they showed up in Lake Norman and Parksville Reservoir. And then it was on, brother. Just 10 years later, they showed up all over the Tennessee River Basin. Just a little, and then also farther out in North Carolina and then over in the Oconee. And in the 2020s, they're in Virginia, and they're spreading eastward through North Carolina. Now, I don't know how old most of you guys are. I can barely, it seems like I blinked my eyes and 2000 was yesterday. But I've been at Auburn for 22 years. So you're literally talking about, in my career at Auburn University, they have rapidly taken over the Carolinas. And they're into Virginia, and then eastern Tennessee. And they're finding them in more places in eastern Tennessee. What does all this mean, and what does it end? I can just tell you this. The people on the outside of this looking are freaking out. Virginia is shitting its pants. Tennessee is on DEFCON 1 right now. Like, oh my God, we have to keep these things from Dale Hollow at all costs. Kentucky, West Virginia, they're running around the state, genotyping all their fish as fast as they can. Oh my God, are they here? Are they here? Are they here? As they should be. Because where does it end? This is where we are right now. Where's it going from there is the real question. And I can tell you, it don't have far to go to really be scary. Oh. Anyone know where that is? Look how close the leading edge of that is to the Susquehanna. Show of hands who thinks it would be a good idea for Alabama bass to be put in the Susquehanna. And I'll tell you, I already had, it was someone that wasn't Drew, it was the smallmouth guys that I talked to. They were like, what about the Susquehanna? What else? I'm like, do you own a map? Because right now they're 120 miles from the edge of the Chattahoochee. They came a long way, baby. That's only 120 miles. It's not far for some dickhead to drive them up there and dump them in. If I were you, I'd really be worried. And if they get in the Susquehanna, who's to say that the Lake Erie isn't next? And if they get there, then what about the St. Lawrence Seaway? And if they get there, what about Lake Champlain? We don't know. This is the scary part. We have no idea. We're not in control of this ship. We have no idea what the hell is going on or where it ends. People ask me all the time, do you think they'll show up here? It all depends on how far some asshole's willing to drive them. That's the question, and I don't have the answer to that. If we look overall at black bass, the scorecard since 2010, which is somewhat arbitrary, but shoal bass have been officially extirpated from Alabama. They've been eliminated from at least 60% of their native range in the Chattahoochee Basin. Currently, we have count them, three strong populations of shoal bass in tributaries and 2 fragmented ones below dams. And that's the list below Atlanta. 5 populations. That's it. That sounds pretty scary to me. We've already seen, since 2010, 3 populations go extinct in Columbus. That one that I mentioned in Big Creek disappear from introgression. That stock population that was looking so freaking awesome in the late 2000s is now just a bunch of introgressed mutts. And so in all, we may only have 1 completely pure population in the entire basin, and that's above Lake Lanier. That's pretty sobering. Now, the only ray of sunshine here is the Flint River Basin seems to be still good. There's a lot of non-native spotted bass that are actually intergressing. Spotted bass, Alabama bass is what they actually are. But the tribs, I have no idea what's in there, and I looked, back in 18, I had a friend take me to 2 different tribs to get some big clips of shoal bass, and we caught spotted bass in both of those tribs. That's not encouraging. you know, red-eyed bass, they're impearled through most of their range. Altamaha bass, you have urbanization from Atlanta and Athens. You have the loss of mainstream habitat from dams. You have integration from shoal bass and Alabama bass. They are currently gone from the main stem of Oldmogi. The main stem of Coney is under attack from hybridization. And again, we have no idea about the trips in either reservoir or in either river. Chattahoochee bass have been extirpated through most of their range. And the ones that are left are suffering from excessive integration. There may only be 2 or 3 pure populations left of that species. In Alabama, there's not much of a prettier picture. The warrior and Cahaba bass both suffer from high rates of hybridization with Alabama bass. There seems to be one refuge for the warrior bass. It's Bankhead National Forest. There's very few hybrid fish there. There is nothing of that nature in the Cahaba. The Tallapoosa and the Coosa seem secure, but there's some higher integration in a few of them. And the crazy thing here is Alabama bass are native. There's native on native crime. And so just goes to show that Alabama bass are truly the hose of the bass world. Bartram's bass, we didn't mention them at all. They are going extinct. Also, the only thing saving their ass is that they happen to live in the mountains where there's like waterfalls and stuff. And so above the waterfalls, they're good. Below the waterfalls, not so good. They've been extirpated from the reservoirs for years, except for Lake Jocassee, and that's going down and literally in front of our eyes. Every time they take genetic samples, there's fewer of them. And then, of course, Alabama bass are widely introduced now through the Carolinas, Tennessee, Virginia, and we have no idea where it goes from there. The future's uncertain, but it's certainly not bright. And this is why is this such a problem? As I wrap this up, why is this such a problem? Why can't we get ahead of this? What is going on? Well, there's some very bright people in science, as you know, and they love to sit down and draw on pieces of paper and think of all this shit. And they call it this time-scale mismatch between the impacts and the response. You know, 4 alignment timescales, common thread that explains why complex conservation challenges are so difficult to examine. And this is definitely a complex conservation challenge. And they have this really nice figure and all that shit. Let me just boil this down. It takes an inordinate amount of effort and time for us to keep tabs on the population. However, it only takes a jackass a few seconds to dump them out in the bucket. And so that's the timescale mismatch. We can do all we can do to keep our tabs on this, and we can still have Johnny Dickhead come out there and dump fish without us looking, and that's it, man. Once they're in, they're in. And there's very little we can do about it. The fish are being stocked on a train, not literally, but figuratively, and the biologists are Forrest Gump running. Or even worse, they just stick their head in the sand and hope it all goes away, and then what happens is they get run over by the steamroller. So what can we do? We as biologists, well, fish status surveys need to be implemented immediately, and we're trying to do that, and we need to monitor it through time. We have to assess better ways to sample these damn fish, which is going to require innovative thinking. Rapid genetic processing is so impressive, so needed. We have to engage the public. You know, I don't think there's anyone in this room that's going to be throwing bass around, but there's obviously an awful lot of people that don't have any compunction about it whatsoever. And you know, we need funding, obviously. We need regulation changes. Quite frankly, most of the illegal fish introduction stuff is finable with just a little fine. It isn't that big a deal. I mean, they need to like go to prison or something. I mean, it needs to be basically ecological sabotage, which is what it is. So that's what we can do. What can you do? Well, what we need, what we can't do and you can, is we're the talking heads. We are the nerd pencil people carrying, you know, we're the pencil neck geeks. And we may not have the same impact. You guys are fishermen. You are anglers. You are professional anglers. Some of you are guides. You rub shoulders with a lot more anglers than we do. Peer pressure is far better than anything I can say, and if you don't believe me, think of the whole thing about catch and release and how that all came about. There's almost too much catch and release today because Ray Scott started this whole thing off, and if you had asked biologists in the 1970s if we would ever get to the point where no one would keep bass, they would have all bet their houses against that. And look where we are today, and it's all from peer pressure. It isn't anything that we did. You know, you guys are out there, you're also the eyes on the ground. If you think or hear anything about people stocking fish, you should totally get a hold of someone in the state agency. The social media has been so good. I mean, is Eric here somewhere? Eric was really, just by simply posting fish, that I'm like, he's in the Oconee. Those look like Alabama bass. I need to find out where he went, where he was, and he tells me roughly where I'm not asking for fishing spots. I'm like, are you above Lake Oconee? That's all I need to know. He's like, yes. I'm like, shit. And then I can tell, you know, the same thing with what was going on with below Sinclair was literally someone sending me a picture, you know, saying, hey, look what my buddy caught. I'm like, uh-oh, you know. So, you know, it's important. We're not going to solve this on ourselves. Everyone has to help, you know. So I'm going to wrap this up with the story. If you've heard this before, I'm sorry. This is the chair. It's sitting in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. This is the very chair that General George Washington sat at presiding over the Constitutional Congress as they were drafting the Constitution. Politics was no prettier then than it is today. There was all kinds of squabbling and infighting, and this group wanted this and this group wanted that, and they were fighting and calling each other names and all that, as you would expect. You know, and so Ben Franklin, this Philadelphia hero, if you will, was sitting in the back of the room. He was an old man by then, and he was taking all this in, you know. And after a couple days, it looked like they were finally going to bury the hatchet, write the damn Constitution, and we were going to become a country. And I don't remember the person that asked Ben Franklin this, but he was staring at the chair that last day. And the guy asked him, what are you staring at the chair for? And Ben Franklin said, I've been sitting here this whole time watching George and looking at the back of the chair, and I was not sure if that was a rising sun or a setting sun. Is that a rising sun where we're going to become a country and be something? Or is this all going to be a grand experiment that goes down as the sun? And now I'm happy to say that it's a rising sun. And I will say to you, in the 21st century, we too have a decision to make. And when we see every single scene like this, we too have to ask, is this a rising sun or a setting sun on native black bass diversity in this country? Are we going to fix this problem? Are we going to stop the madness? Or are we going to just be here to write the epitaph as it goes away? The answer of that is up to us. I appreciate your attention as always and appreciate the opportunity. If you don't follow the American Black Bass Conservation Committee Facebook page, it's one I run. We have a very fun What's That Bass Wednesday challenge every week. And we put up fucked up bass and you tell me what it's not and I'll tell you what it is. No, but it's a great way to get out. It's a great thing to get out the message that there's all these bass and hey, they're in trouble. I try to do conservation messages, little snippets of some of the stuff I already talked about today. My email and my office phone number is there. Feel free to reach out anytime. I can be found also through that website. Thank you all very much. I very much appreciate it.